Hey everyone, welcome to a special episode of Content Marketing Takedown. Today we're going to look at a segment of the online therapy world, specifically Talkspace and also BetterHelp. These are two big companies in the space, both doing a pretty solid job from a content marketing standpoint. And I thought it was worth sharing both of them to give context. People often say, don't look at your competitors, but in the SEO world, I do feel like it's pretty relevant to be better than the competition. There are definitely relevant examples of people doing decent jobs that would be good in one market, but completely not even competitive in another one. And I think there are some interesting examples of that in this space, which do come top of mind. When you look at BetterHelp in comparison to Talkspace, they're actually significantly behind them, despite doing pretty okay from a search standpoint. And I see that only continuing to trend forward for the site. So just for context, BetterHelp online therapy, basically if you want to talk to a counselor or a therapist in some way, this is one of the awesome companies that are on the up and up, and that they make it easy for you to talk to a therapist without having to go in office. And they're also significantly more affordable. Talkspace is that exact same concept, just a different brand, and they're very competitive with each other. And you can see just overall very quickly the feeling and difference between the two companies and what they might do well. For the most part, we're going to focus on BetterHelp and dig into their content section. So one thing that immediately struck me and I thought was an interesting thought process for just your content strategy in general is the idea of what should your content section be called? It shouldn't always be as straightforward as just saying it's blog. To me, one thing that resonated immediately, and it's very simple just because it's a word, but the fact that BetterHelp called their blog section advice, I thought made sense. It's thinking through the problem, how someone would think about what they're getting from BetterHelp. They're going to BetterHelp for advice. They're not going to BetterHelp for blog. And you can think through how this might help, one, drive more engagement of this section, but also speak to the user. And this is just one subtle example of how this same concept could apply for your own market. Maybe your market needs to be news or learn, or maybe there's some other way of qualifying what the content section should be. And maybe not always is as important or resonant as it would be in a BetterHelp example. But I thought it was a stopping point for me in thinking, hey, maybe we can think through the naming conventions of our content sections to specifically map to what our clients and companies do. And BetterHelp does a great job of that in particular. If you dig into the advice section, unfortunately, most of the love stops there. And their section is very stock photo heavy, outdated feeling overall, not really organized in a super structured way. You can see a lot of the common places and ways people might think about the things that they might want advice on or therapy about. They are hosted in this railing, but it's just not an optimal way of structuring a problem. To me, this kind of setup could be better structured with maybe a call to action search box at the top that says, search your problem, or what are you looking for help with? Probably is a better way of saying that in this space. And then they can pull from a drop down, or they can search in a very prominent area of that search box. Or it could just be a drop down that has all the links to the category nav as well, besides just the ugly railing that they currently have on their site. And this is the main hub that people are dropped on. And there are some articles that are popular and what have you, but this seems more based on search intent versus what someone might actually want to click and find via this content hub. It overall could be organized more concretely, I think thought through from a data standpoint, and also from an aesthetic standpoint, because they're pretty far behind their competitor Talkspace in that regard. And if we dig into some of their articles, we'll actually see the common problems that exist with BetterHelp is that the font size is just really, really small. I would not even give this content a chance, honestly, from a readability standpoint. It should be at least 18 pixels. This looks like it's more in the 12 range. And they're not very scannable overall. They'll use images, but they're almost always stock photos. and they don't really enhance the content in any way. This looks like something I would never want us to put out, honestly. But amazingly, they're doing fine with this. BetterHelp, they have a great product, so that carries them a lot of the way, and they have a decent authority because of that product. But their content strategy is almost more of an afterthought that is probably just being powered from that raw authority, not the quality of their content as a whole. And you can see that it is generally an issue for them. So if they bump up their font, they make it more scannable, aesthetically pleasing setup, I think they'll do better overall with their content for sure. And I do think something just from a EAT standpoint, their authors, if they are actually therapists, which it looks like Amy is. Actually, it's not. Amy is not a therapist whatsoever, but she's giving people advice. That seems somewhat like a disconnect. They could at least have a therapist review these articles to make sure they're saying the right things, the things that they would recommend. But currently, BetterHelp is just having their own writers do that. Thankfully, they have some built-in trust based on what they are as a company, but it just could be another added point where at least a therapist or counselor could review this, QA it, and you could have a reviewed by blank therapist as kind of a trust-building exercise with that content that would allow them to do better. From a link acquisition standpoint, BetterHelp is acquiring a good amount of links simply through their product and that visibility, but they could definitely accelerate it. One thing I know about a lot of these different symptoms and problem areas on the right is that people will often search for data around these. So almost all of these side instances could have a anxiety statistics or ADHD statistics page that kind of references and curates a lot of those major stats that bloggers, reporters are often referencing, and in turn would reference BetterHelp if they simply make a nice, good-looking asset there that ranks, that performs well, and is going to drive some momentum. These are competitive search results, so I would generally suggest that they lean really hard into a really quality asset. We'll show you on screen a few examples that we've done in these spaces that have been successful. And what we generally suggest for our clients is to build a moat for these top funnel assets that have some passive value to that client in order to make sure that someone just doesn't wake up tomorrow and build an amazing autism statistics resource and or outrank them. So BetterHelp has massive opportunity from that standpoint in this content section. So they could build out a whole hub of new interesting data in the space that they can leverage and utilize in order to up their link velocity and perform even better from that standpoint. So another thing that stands out about BetterHelp is actually how aggressive their calls to action are on their content. And as a general rule here, I think there's a lesson for anybody. You'll see that they actually push a call to action for their product in the top above the fold section, almost above the fold, just barely squeaks out not being above the fold on this browser side. But I would generally say in the top 20% of your content, that is too aggressive to have a call to action almost in any vertical. So their setup here is non-optimal from that standpoint and likely will drive users to bail from their user experience. So I would generally suggest that they remove that, maybe move it down to 50%. I think it also aesthetically could be way better looking than it is currently. It's not currently just a problem that the text looks bad here, but their overall layout is outdated. It uses old share buttons. It's just not trust-inducing from that standpoint, and I think that's going to cost them comparatively. So if we dig into Talkspace and what they're doing well as a relative standpoint, we can see the differences. This is clearly more of a content company. BetterHelp is very clearly excellent at paid search. You can tell it and feel it in terms of how aggressive they get with their call to actions. But Talkspace relatively has a much better content experience and call to action framework, which informs their much better growth overall. So if we look at Talkspace, we actually see on this article in particular, we get a call to action, but it was almost more 50% down the page, if not more than that, and also looks way better. They also do a good job of having the call to action in the right rail, which is not the main body content of the content. Because of that, I think is not as invasive as compared to the BetterHelp example, which on mobile will definitely come front and center for them. You can just feel this difference in the design of this blog. The font size is larger, it's cleaner, it looks better. And they also just overall have a better, more user-friendly, easy to read setup. If you keep browsing on Talkspace, you also get nice related linking, which compels you to stay on page, which I think is well executed. And they also have this load setup, which will auto load the next article and start you over again on that process if you want to keep reading. And that's compelling. It's going to make you stay. If you found that article, you liked it, you keep scrolling, you might click this, you might click their Instagram, you might actually take action on the call to action. This is just night and day better than the way BetterHelp is currently executing their content strategy. And Talkspace is being rewarded with that in how they're doing overall. So on the negative side of Talkspace's strategy, they're not perfect. They definitely do a good job from a design standpoint. One thing that we've noticed recently, and is definitely a thing for voice search and just quick answers generally, is Google wants a shorter answer. So if we look at their definition for what is operant conditioning, we can actually see they actually have a pretty long definition here. So although they do immediately get into this in terms of structuring in a way that a robot could understand, the actual sentence is pretty long. So if you can think about, could they shorten this to say operant conditioning is blank and half the length of this definition? It might be more likely that they return a quick answer, also get shown in voice search, get that brand impression, and make a good impression for users overall. So in looking at one of their more important pages, which is online therapy, and definitely a big term that they're trying to rank for, they're not really optimized well here at all. The title tag, the URL clearly are nudging that direction. But if you look at the content, it's more of a call to action for their bottom funnel setup versus the actual user intent of solving for that. I do think they can be qualified for online therapy, but they don't really define what online therapy is above the fold or anywhere near the top. That's going to be an issue for them in actually ranking for this term. Another thing that just overall irritated me about the way this is set up is if you look at the end of the content, all of their footer links will actually open in a new tab. This is as we've talked about previously in a Salesforce video, not a great user experience and pushing me to that section versus I should have the decision about whether or not to open in a new tab or not. And if we look at online therapy as a search, we can reconfirm, are definitions something users are looking for from this kind of query, or do they have it well solved for? So in looking at this, I actually would say that they do not want definition, even though it's a jargon sort of term. Most people probably know what online therapy is when they search for it. So in their instance, I actually would suggest that they drop what is online therapy and instead make that its own article and let this bottom funnel landing page stand alone for what it is. And they'll do a better job of actually optimizing it for that and also long tail versions of that same term as compared to the actual what is online therapy search, which is more likely to be informational in nature and not be a bottom funnel landing page in comparison. You can see that there's an article here. Their bottom funnel page does rank, but for the most part, these are all article-based pages rather than bottom funnel pages. I think they're more likely to rank number one and hold that position. They made a definitional type page against it and then had a bottom funnel type page against it as they don't currently. They do fine, so take it for a grain of salt, but overall, it's not how I would suggest that they move forward with their strategy. Another thing that Talkspace does well is that they have a section of their post content where they'll actually have a downloadable based on what section they're on, and they'll swap this in at different times. And we'll see here, they have a guide to everyday mistakes. They also have another ebook that different sections will trigger. And I think this is a smart strategy depending on the vertical, where you can get them on your email list. Maybe they're not ready to commit to therapy today, but they're starting to think from a top funnel standpoint that I might want that. It makes sense to get them on your list. And a good way to do that is a compelling ebook call to action. They're also intelligent in terms of mapping it to the categories that exist. And because of that, are more likely to actually have a pretty sizable email list. And I would guess a following that actually reads their blog as compared to the BetterHelp example that doesn't feel as clear from that vantage point. So overall, both great companies. And as we pull in to look at the performance of BetterHelp today from an organic standpoint and from Talkspace today as well. Talkspace is clear up and to the right. BetterHelp is more erratic, which I think is reflected in just their strategy. I would expect Talkspace to continue to excel. They do a great job of mapping SEO-driven content and brand-driven content in a way that makes sense and is compelling in today's day and age. BetterHelp is less quality content, clearly keyword-driven, not organized well, and they're lucky to have the raw authority right now to be able to rank. But with some focus, they could do much, much better. So from a rating standpoint, as a content marketing takedown, I would definitely give Talkspace an A, and unfortunately, I would give BetterHelp a D. Both great companies, but from a content standpoint, I probably would be trusting Talkspace more than BetterHelp as it stands today. So we'd love to hear what you think about these two companies, what they're currently doing, and if you have any thoughts about their strategy today. If you like this, give us a thumbs up, subscribe, and let me know what you thought. Thanks. Thumbs up, subscribe, and let me know.